So I've just begun the recording. We've already said the bracha, and now we will proceed into the final chapter of Pirkei Avot, the 6th of 6 chapters. Just as a quick refresh reminder, chapter 6, like the very last part of chapter 5, is understood to be a loose anthology of wise sayings from the Mishnaic Rabbinic community. So we're talking about sayings that were either composed or compiled somewhere in the century before the Common Era, BC, which does not mean before COVID, as some have now taken to calling anything before March of 2020 is BC. That's how it feels sometimes, like trying to dredge up ancient history of what life was like before March of 2020. No, BC is the Christian designation of before Christ. Jewish people and other non-Christian peoples prefer BCE, before the Common Era, or before the Christian era is also accurate. So before what we call the year 0. So the century BCE up until the middle of the 3rd century of the Common Era, CE, what our Christian friends call AD, Anno Domini, in the year of their Lord, is the Mishnaic period. And these sayings generally derive from rabbinic teaching from that general period. So what we're going to look at is Pirkei Avot chapter 6, starting at Mishnah number 2, Mishnah meaning teaching. So I'll just dive in, and as is our practice, we'll start with a little bit of the Hebrew and then we'll jump to the English. But it is nice to remind ourselves that Hebrew is not a scary language, but a beautiful language that contains all sorts of meaning that you don't get from translation. Amar Rabbi Joshua ben Levi. So we're looking at Rabbi Joshua ben Levi and what he has to say. And he's a really prominent sage of the Mishnah. If you ever want to know more about the sage in question, you can actually, on Safaria, which is the online directory and amazing interactive module for consulting Jewish tradition and texts, you can click on, I really don't know what I would have done if we had Safaria in rabbinical school. I either would have graduated in 2 years or 23 years because there's so many rabbit holes. You just click on the name and you can learn about Rabbi Joshua ben Levi of the Amoraim, which is simply a designation to a generation of sages. So the first of the Amoraim. The Amoraim are the second great generation, like the macro generations of Jewish teachers. For the first better part of 3 centuries prior, you have the original teachers who are known as the Tanaim. Tana being the Aramaic form of the word Mishnah. Mishnah and Tana are both related to the Hebrew root vishinantam, or shen, or shanan. Shin nun nun in Hebrew, tav nun nun in Aramaic. If you're really into this geeky language stuff, shins and tavs are transposed from Hebrew to Aramaic. So many words that are shin something that incorporate the letter shin in Hebrew, when transposed to Aramaic, which is a cognate language, that was the vernacular of the Jewish people in the Mishnaic period, shins become tavs. Okay, why exactly? I don't know. But so shin nun nun is the root that means to teach, in the sense of to impress deeply. We talked about last week how the root actually comes from the Hebrew word for your tooth, your shen. So you bite down, and that's the kind of teaching. It's teaching that makes an impression, or as Jane said last week, you grind your teeth into this material. Taf nun nun, tanan, is the Mishnaic form. So the Tanaim are the original teachers, and then you have the next macro generation of teachers known as the Amoraim. And the Amoraim come from the Hebrew root aleph mem resh, amar, which means to speak. And these words, by the way, point to the oral origins of Jewish teaching, right? Why is a dental body part identified with teaching? Why is the first group of sages called the Tanaim, those who use their teeth to teach? Why is the second macro generation of teachers known as the Amoraim, the speakers or the reciters? Probably it is a tell or a giveaway, a hint that originally much of this teaching was communicated by people who had memorized vast tracts of text and were charged with reciting it in front of bodies of pupils. And again, it's all speculative because all we have is text. We have something that is written, but there are hints at an original oral tradition here. So Rabbi Joshua ben Levi, again, just getting back to this wonderful built-in feature of Sefaria, you click on the name of the sage and his bio comes up, was known for his piety as well as his scholarship and is frequently quoted in the Talmud. He is a contemporary of Rabbi Chia and was the head of an academy in Lod, which is in what is today the land of Israel. Among other things, he was known for his access to Elijah, the prophet who did not die, the prophet who was swept up into the whirlwind and who makes special visits at Passover time, as well as every bris or baby naming, as well as at Havdalah. Elijah keeps coming back to encourage the Jewish people to work toward redemption. And his, meaning Joshua's, ben Levi's, ability to negotiate with the angel of death. So he is ascribed mystical powers. Anyway, that's just a little bit of the lore around Joshua ben Levi. The Chol Yom Vayom, right? See how see how easy Hebrew can be. The Chol Yom Vayom. These are all words that we know. Each and every day. Right, bechol yom, all days, vayom, and that this formulation yom vayom means day in, day out, or day after day. Bechol yom vayom, each and every day, bat kol yotzet mehar chorev umachrezet ve'omeret. Okay, this is a really interesting phrase. Every day, a bat kol, which here they translate a heavenly voice. We're going to talk about bat kol, goes forth from a place called Mount Horev, and makes a proclamation, machrezet ve'omeret, literally declares and proclaims, and then we're going to get to the content. But let's set up the context before we look at the content. So the premise is Rabbi Joshua ben Levi is going to teach us something. He says, every day, a bat kol, bat, most of us know, is the Hebrew word for a daughter, kol with a kuf, not a kaf. We looked at this last week. Kaf lamed means kol, al kol Yisrael, over all of Israel. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar ma'od, the entire world is but a narrow bridge, quoting Reb Nachman of Bratslav, the great 18th century Hasidic master. This is kol with a kuf vav lamed, false cognate. It's just they just sound the same. What do you call words that sound the same? Homonyms. They're homonyms. Kol with a kuf vav lamed means a voice, right? So bat kol, literally the daughter of a voice, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So when bat kol is used throughout the traditional literature, it refers to a heavenly voice, just a disembodied voice, which is always understood to be communicating what God would say if, as it were, God had the power of speech. It seems to be a rabbinic acknowledgement that, yes, God still communicates with us, people, but not exactly in the face-to-face, voice-to-ear way in which the Torah describes how God communicated with Moses back in the day, right? So there's a little bit of I think by using the term bat kol, what the rabbis want to suggest is that there's a little bit of a distancing in the immediacy of connection between God and the people. It's not God. It never says God says. It says there's a bat kol. There's like a heavenly voice or a divine voice. Bat kol comes up very famously in a number of Talmudic stories, some of which you may have heard. The most famous of which concerns something called the oven of Achnai, in which a bunch of rabbis are debating about the kosher status of a particular oven. not important, but they get so heated and so dug in their own argument positions that they can't resolve the dispute except through a bat kol that comes to decide the halacha. And by the way, I'm stripping out all the fun parts of the story. It's an amazing story where one rabbi is arguing, if I am right, and I think Joshua ben Levi is in this story, interestingly enough. So this may not be Joshua ben Levi's first association with bat kol. I think it's Eliezer and Yehoshua ben Levi, but please don't quote me on it because I didn't prepare this text in advance. I'll go and look it up. But in the famous oven, if somebody just looks up oven of Achnai, Akhnai, you'll find all the details. But Eliezer, I believe, says, if I am right, let this carob tree prove it. And he points to a carob tree, and all of a sudden, the carob tree is uprooted from its ground and transposed like many, many, many tens of cubits away. It like just leaps and moves, something no normal tree could do. And his antagonist, his opponent in the debate says, carob tree proves nothing. Like, you can't prove a halacha with, with a moving tree. I'm reminded of that wonderful scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, early in the movie, where King Arthur is speaking to a particularly mouthy peasant, where he's explaining that you're my subject, and the peasant is saying, well, who made you king? And he explains how the Lady of the Lake presented him with an opportunity to withdraw Excalibur from the stone in which it had been lodged, and that proved that he was the king. And the great line, memorably delivered, I think it's by Terry Gilliam, one of the great late members of Monty Python, says, strange women lying around in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. It's just a great line. I say this because it reminds me of this Talmudic passage, the oven of Achnai, which I think is tractate, oh, don't quote me, Shabbat 59a. Somebody's going to find this and then prove me wrong. Is all about authority. In Jewish law, who has the authority to declare it is Rabbi Eliezer versus Yehoshua? Good, I'm happy about that. I'm doing this without preparing, which is never a good way to teach. So what gives a rabbi or a person the authority to say the halacha is X, right? How is this determined? And when Rabbi Eliezer says, well, my carob tree just proved it. I just summoned a divine miracle that proved I'm right. And Yehoshua says, the equivalent of strange women lying around in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. A miracle, in other words, does not prove that the halacha, the Jewish law, is authoritatively the law that you think it is. And he goes on to say, well, he's not convinced. He's not convinced that this is not the way to prove his point. So he says, if I'm right, let this, and there's something else he says, prove it. Let this stream, I think, is next, prove it. And then all of a sudden, a stream of water outside the Beit Midrash is diverted. Like, again, many, many, many cubits. So the stream changes course and flows in a totally different direction. And again, his antagonist says, you can't, no, that doesn't prove anything. And then finally, he says, if I am right, let the very walls of the house of study prove it, of the Beit Midrash prove it. And at that moment, the walls begin to collapse, which of course is going to be an existential problem for the rabbis who are debating inside of the study house. At that very moment, a bat kol comes forth. Okay, that's why we're actually, I'm not down such a rabbit hole that this has Monty Python. What is he talking about? This is all related. A divine voice comes in. Thank you, Michelle. This is fantastic. So through the chat window, you can call up the text that Michelle located. Michelle, by the way, is a wonderful and accredited Jewish educator in her own right. One of the things that Michelle did during the last few years when we were all just like mastering the remote control on the couches, you actually got a degree in Jewish education from Hebrew University. Bava Metzia 59a. So I remembered 59a. I did not remember that the tractate was Bava Metzia, which is the second tractate in the Talmudic order called nizikin. It's all torts, damages. So we're talking about the source of rabbinic authority. The walls of the Beit Midrash are collapsing in. A bat kol comes forward, and what the bat kol says is one of the most memorable lines in the entire rabbinic canon, in all of Jewish literature. It says, lo, or she says, it's a bat kol, not a ben kol, lo bashamayim hi. It is not in the heavens. Meaning, most of us who read this text conclude, the source of rabbinic authority is not up to God, much less God's bat kol, to decide. And at that moment, it tells us the walls of the Beit Midrash stopped collapsing and remained in this kind of like delicate, precarious, hanging, leaning position. And it goes on to explain in this text that in the yeshiva world, the way in which halachic authority is decided when there is an irresolvable debate between two rabbinic authorities who are equally venerated, God doesn't get to decide. The answer is one inclines toward the majority.
That's a great idea.
That is the rabbinic precept that is underlined in Bava Metzia 59a and b. Al harabim lehatot, which is a quote, I think, from the book of Leviticus that is in this passage of Talmud interpreted to mean we side with the majority. So when you take a vote in the academy, and because at the end of the day, it may be true that both the words of, and another famous line from this is Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. Both his and his, both rabbis' opinions are words of the very living God. That's an astonishing statement, by the way, that both the majority opinion, the two rabbinic opinions which are diametrically opposed, can be equally divinely inspired or divinely conveyed. But at the end of the day, you still need a law, right? You still need a ruling. And the fact that I don't even remember what exactly the matter is with the oven of Achnai is probably important in and of itself. So a bat kol, all of this is by way of saying the bat kol is the divine voice, but it lacks the force of law in the rabbinic community. For the rabbis, the ultimate authority to decide law lies in the rabbinic community, and it's a matter of simple majority. The Talmud is, I think, painstaking about recording minority opinions as well. But again, a law needs a majority opinion and majority rules, and that's why so many decisions of consequence, even in our own American Republic, really have come down to a 5-4 ruling, right? I mean, whether you like it or not, a split Supreme Court is nevertheless still a Supreme Court that can decide consequential things for the fate of the Republic. Thank you for the clarification. Somebody, I won't reference all of it, but Sandy, thank you. You've clarified for me the legal term tort, which is helpful. Okay. I'll keep that in mind when I use it going forward. So let's move forward in our text. That was I hope, meaningful digression on one phrase, bat kol, and it's not just an isolated term, though it is the first time we've seen it in Pirkei Avot. So a bat kol goes forth from Chorev, which is the alter ego of Mount Sinai. It's not a secret name. It's actually the name that is used throughout the Torah. The book of Deuteronomy only refers to Sinai as Chorev, and it's also it's elsewhere. It's in the book of Exodus, I think, as well. But Sinai and Chorev are understood to be the same place. That is not terribly unusual in biblical literature, that place names often, or that places often go by multiple names, which I believe is often an acknowledgement that different places were venerated by different communities, and maybe there's a later redactor's effort to say, no, the shrine that you venerate, that you call Chorev, it's the same place that the people from, the south call Sinai, so as to harmonize regional or tribal differences in how the Israelite identity and Israelite religion came to coalesce. I can say more about that if what I just said is confusing, but I'm going to move on. So a voice goes forth from Mount Horev, Sinai, and says, Oy lahem. I love this word, oy. Aleph, Vav, Yud. If you've not seen that word before, if you think that oy is Yiddish, you're wrong. It's a biblical word, biblical and rabbinic Hebrew. Oy, woe. So it's a real word. Oy lahem. It's an interjection. Oy, vav, woe to them. Labriot me elbona shel Torah. So woe unto humankind. Woe. It doesn't actually say humankind. It just says woe unto them for their contempt. Elbona, really interesting word right here. For their contempt toward the Torah. For whoever does not occupy himself with the study of Torah is called a nazuf, the one who is rebuked. It's missing an end parenthesis here. As it is said, like a gold ring in the snout of a pig is a beautiful woman bereft of sense. Are you familiar with the phrase like lipstick on a pig? Which means you can dress something yucky up or something distasteful up any way you like. It's still a pig. So here they're suggesting that, and this is a misogynist image, a woman bereft of sense, right? Something that, again, remember the audience that is both writing this and for whom it is intended, a male audience. The book of Proverbs is also a biblical book, like Avot itself, that is intended to communicate certain wisdom to probably young men, young scholars. And a lot of the book of Proverbs is about the very personification of chokhmah, or wisdom, which the rabbis read as a stand-in for a metonym for Torah. So when the book of Proverbs talks about wisdom, the rabbis say it's really talking about Proverbs. I'm gonna bring this up on just so you can see a little bit of how the book of Proverbs is composed, what kind of language, what kind of teaching, because I don't think many of us read the book of Proverbs on the regular. So this is the excerpt from Proverbs that we're looking at. Starting at verse 16, a graceful woman obtains honor, ruthless men obtain wealth, a kindly man benefits himself, a cruel man makes trouble for himself. These wise little aphorisms phrased as kind of couplets. The wicked man earns illusory wages, but he who sows righteousness has a true reward. Righteousness is a prop of life, but to pursue evil leads to death. Men of crooked mind are an abomination to the Lord, but those whose way is blameless please him. Assuredly, the evil man will not escape, but the offspring of the righteous will be safe. And here's the verse in question, verse 22. Nezem zahav be'af chazir, like a gold ring in the snout of a pig, is a beautiful woman bereft of sense, right? So, yes, a woman's surface beauty is what may be initially attractive to a man, but what really matters, Proverbs is teaching here, is her seichel. And the word, by the way, for sense, just so you can see it in Hebrew, is, ta'am, which literally means flavor. This sarat ta'am, missing flavor. So that's also pretty challenging to understand, because the book of Proverbs is influenced by early Greek philosophy and by biblical poetry. So it's a particularly thorny book to make sense of. Getting back to the Avot text that we're looking at, like a gold ring in the snout of a pig is a beautiful woman bereft of sense. So remember, this is a proof text for the lament that's coming forth in this heavenly voice. Woe unto humankind for their contempt toward Torah. For whoever does not occupy himself with the study of Torah is called a nazuf, spurned or rebuked, outcast, marginal. What does that have to do with a gold ring in the snout of a pig, a beautiful woman bereft of sense? What's being communicated here? Can somebody unpack this? Like, what the heck is this Pirkei Avot teaching really all about? We've gone way into the weeds, and now I'm going to pull back the lens and ask you to kind of make sense of what is being talked about in this text. Okay, Steve, you're on, please.
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov.
Part of it could be that it's important to commit part of your time and day to study Torah, to really make the effort to understand and study the learnings and the teachings.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, remember the whole context here is the rabbis are coming up with numerous and increasingly elaborate poetic ways to make a case for a life of routinized Torah study. Great. I'm going to hear a few more comments, and then we'll get back to the snout of the pig. Okay, Mom and Dad, you can unmute, please.
It seems to have something to say about frivolous pursuits versus serious pursuits. I mean, the misogynistic point here is that women who are beautiful must be concerned only with frivolous things. There's no consideration that you might have a smart, beautiful woman.
Right.
But it seems to take as given that if you spend your time on beauty, then you are pursuing the trivial as opposed to the valuable.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, what is misogynist about this text is the assumption that you can't have both brains and beauty, or that a woman who is beautiful or pays attention to beautifying herself is nevertheless empty, right? Empty-headed, empty-minded. So the analogy is to somebody who really neglects Torah, neglects the stuff that gives life its depth, its meaning, its substance, its, you know, and also feeds the brain and not the surface appearance of one's life. Wonderful. Moving on, right, pursuing frivolous activities, right. So that's the analogy. I think you've unpacked it exactly well. And then it goes on to give another proof text. So this is what rabbis like to do. It's like, and while I'm drushing, check out this. And it says, meaning the scripture, the Torah says, and the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tablets. And that should be a familiar phrase. This is what it looks like in its context. Thereupon Moses turned. So Moses is on Mount Sinai. This is what is about to happen. The spoiler alert is that Moses is about to encounter the golden calf. All right, that happens just at the tail end of chapter 32. Moses turned and went down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed on both of their surfaces. They were inscribed on the one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing incised upon the tablets. That's the verse that captures Joshua's attention. Joshua ben Levi, the rabbi here, it says, "V'haluchot ma'aseh Elohim hema." The tablets were the work of God. "V'hamichtav michtav Elohim hu," and the writing was the writing of God. Charut al haluchot. Charut. This is the word that interests them. Chet resh vav tav. Charut, which means incised, carved with a stylus. That's a stylus in biblical Hebrew is, I believe, the word cheret. A cheret is a stylus, and something that is incised or inscribed with a stylus is charut. But the rabbis are very punny, and what Joshua ben Levi does with this is interesting. He says, read not charut, graven, but cherut. Revocalize the word, same consonants, different vowels, and you come up with the Hebrew word freedom. For there is no free person, free man, but one that occupies themselves with the study of the Torah. And whoever regularly occupies themselves with the study of Torah, they are surely exalted, as it is said. And then we're going to get to the final proof text. So this is the idea, right? That we're moving now to a kind of coda or elevated cadence for this teaching. That what does it mean to study Torah? True freedom is what Torah offers. Every time I lead a bar mitzvah, there's this wonderful line in our Mishkan Tefillah prayer book. I take the Torah out of the ark, I turn to face the bar bat mitzvah, and I say the following line, which I just quote directly from the Siddur because I think it's lovely. It says, in this Torah is the secret of our people's life from Sinai until now. It teaches love and justice, freedom and hope. No, sorry, goodness and hope. Freedom is its gift to all who treasure it. Right? So for the Jewish people, for the rabbis, law is not restricting or enslaving. Law is an instrument of freedom. There is no true freedom without law. Freedom without law is anarchy. The law of God, the law of Torah, is what ensures true human freedom. That's the premise. By the way, an echo of this is found in one of the latter stanzas of America the Beautiful. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. I think it's the last stanza. It's a beautiful, what's her name? Mary Ward. I'm going to blow it. I'm doing all of this like from memory today. Whoever wrote the lyrics of America the Beautiful, it's a beautiful poem, beautiful song. So confirm thy soul, the soul of America, in self-control, thy liberty, confirm thy liberty in law. We are a country whose freedom is assured through the rule of law. If this sounds like a little bit of something that I want you to keep in mind as you go to the voting booth on Tuesday, so be it, right? That what ensures our freedom in America is are the guarantees that we place in upholding the rule of law. To eliminate that threatens our freedom. I think I've said enough on that, but that is applied here, not in the sense of the American Constitution, but of the Torah itself. The Torah is the guarantor of our freedom, not the mechanism of restricting or denying it. Okay, and then finally, the proof text that ends this wonderful teaching, and then we'll reflect on it for a few minutes. Whoever regularly occupies himself with the study of Torah, he is surely exalted. As it said, well, you would think that there are 100 verses you could use to prove that premise, and this is the one he chooses? It's odd. And from Matana to Nachaliel, and Nachaliel to Bamot. What is this? Click here and find out. This is the wonderful thing about Sefaria. Remember, you can just click and it calls up the verse. Oops, but it didn't do it. What did I do wrong here? Here we go. Let's try it again. Click. There we go. So we're in the middle of the book of Numbers. And just so you see the context, this is, remember, the book of Numbers in Hebrew is called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. So the book of Numbers is sort of like the continuing adventures of the Israelites as they make their way through their wilderness wanderings. From there, they set out and encamped beyond the Arnon, that is in the wilderness that extends from the territory of the Amorites or the old Babylonians. For the Arnon is the boundary of Moab, which is in present-day Jordan, to the northeast of Israel, between Moab and the Amorites. Both enemy territories to the northeast of present-day Israel. And so, again, it's just a travelogue. This is the triptych of the Israelite wanderings. And then there's a digression into a little bit of ancient biblical poetry. Therefore, the book of the wars of Yahweh, the book of the wars, Sefer Milchamot Adonai, the book of the wars of Adonai, speaks of a place, Waheb and Sufa, and the wadis, which were the Arnon and its tributary wadis, stretched along the settled country of Ar, hugging the territory of Moab. In other words, we haven't excavated through archaeology this so-called Book of the Wars of Adonai, but this is not the only time the Torah mentions a so-called Sefer Milchamot Yahweh, Sefer Milchamot Adonai, a book of the wars of Adonai, which seems to be some kind of like anthology of extra biblical stories and records and travelogues and adventures that we don't have, but occasionally it gets quoted in the Torah. And this part of the so-called Book of the Wars of Adonai contains its own little travelogue, which is intended here to elucidate exactly where the Israelites were journeying as they went through the wilderness. That's all this is. And from there to Be'er, which is the well where Adonai said to Moses, assemble the people that I may give them water. So identifying a certain place with a certain event. And there, or then, Israel sang this song. So this is really rabbit holes inside of rabbit holes, right? While we're talking about this identification of a certain place called Be'er, which means the well, which refers to the well that sprung up for the Israelite community when they were wandering through the desert, thirsting for water. There was a song that went with this, a little folk song. Spring up, O well, sing to it. The well with which the chieftains dug, which the nobles of the people started with maces, which their own staves. And from Midbar, now we're back to the travelogue. And from Midbar, which is it literally means wilderness, but it's a desert location, to Matana, which is, among other things, my mom's Hebrew name, Marjorie, given the Hebrew name Matana, which means a gift, which is very nice. But it happens to be a place name in the Bible as well. And from Matana to Nahaliel, and from Nahaliel to Bamot. And from Bamot to the valley that is in the country of Moab at the peak of Pisgah overlooking the wasteland. So it's just a travelogue. So what the heck does this have to do with anything? Whoever regularly occupies himself with the study of Torah is surely exalted, as it is said, from Matana to Nahaliel, from Nahaliel to Bamot. What the heck is this? If anyone likes like games and puzzles, then today's Pirkei Avot class is for you. What is going on here? Does anyone want to venture a guess? How does this prove that the study of Torah exalts a person? This list of place names, specifically Matana to Nahaliel to Bamot, right? So I'm not putting the text on the screen. I'm just telling you, these are the three places that the rabbis say in that order. You go from Matana to Nahaliel to Bamot. And that proves, Rabbi Joshua says, that the study of Torah exalts a person, elevates one's soul or one's spirit. I know the answer, by the way. So let's start with Michelle.
Well, I have only a wild guess, and that is that it did have this little song ditty of exaltation in the middle, and so that's a good thing.
Okay, so you're seeing that the context itself may be more related to what Joshua ben Levi is trying to teach here than perhaps it is letting on at first. And which, by the way, is always wise. When a proof text is cited in a rabbinical teaching, you really have to take the time to go back and read the original and not just the one verse, because often the rabbis' proof texting is highly allusive. So if the rabbis use a proof text to make their point, you got to go back to your Tanakh, look up the proof text, and read the entire passage surrounding it, the verses leading up to it and the verses following it. And that usually will help you understand. So I'm going to let that stand as it is, but it doesn't tell the whole story here. Steve, you want to go next, please?
Perhaps as part of a broader message, and that it's in numbers is important. In numbers, as we say, bin midbar, we're in the wilderness. And God is presenting Torah, not just for law, but presenting wisdom. You need the wisdom to navigate your life and pursue a journey of holiness. And perhaps that's part of the message.
All right, give this man a Drush Gold Medal for the Midrash you just presented, which is also, I think, beautiful and relevant, and it's also still not the whole story. Mom and Dad.
I'm thinking that because it ends at Pisgah, which is the mountain or an overlook, that the journey is one of elevation.
We're getting closer.
Consequently, the study of Torah is a life process of elevation.
Good. Now we're really getting honed in on the level of detail that I'm seeking in our game today. Good. We're going to hold that because it also is true and relevant and also doesn't tell the whole story. And Joe, you'll get the last comment and then I'll give you the answer. Oh, unmute, please, Joe. Oh, only you can unmute. Only you can prevent forest fires. Sorry, Joe, you have to start over, but you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yep, there we go.
Now I had time to get my thought in order.
Good, perfect.
Combining Steve and Doug and your father's comment, I came away with the idea that it's almost like talking in the fiction about Never Never Land, or a comment like from heaven to earth and back. And when you say how much you love a kid, oh, the kid says, I love you to the moon and back, grandpa, or whatever. To me, the three different places, you may never remember the names, but to me, it indicates, or it's a sign, it's a symbol of, no matter where you go, the Torah is the same. The love for Torah or the study of Torah should be the same.
Beautiful.
So if you go here or there, the idea of doing all of this that we're doing today is something that should be an everyday thing, or at least a lifelong objective.
Thank you. And beautiful. And thank you for reminding us what this text is all about at the biggest level, like the broadest level. This is about the routinized, regular commitment to the study of Torah that elevates one's life, that makes that is a pursuit much more gratifying, meaningful, and exalting than putting on makeup, for instance, or the things that beautify the surface of life, to go back to the gold ring in the snout of a pig, misogynist metaphor that's used. So here's the full reveal on the game. And the thing that you had to remember is that the rabbis are very punny, right? The rabbis love wordplay. The rabbis are also committed to the premise that there is no word of Torah without worlds of meaning contained therein. So even something that, this is the part of the Torah that if you're studying either by yourself or even in Torah study, it is so easy to skim these things. Like, oh no, a whole page of travelogue, like a whole page of place locations in Bamidbar. Ugh, I'm going to skip that. I'm not going to give a sermon on that. And the rabbis are really married to the premise that no, you can't skip over any of this. And therefore, if it appears to be a little dry or boring, that's just because you're not reading it the right way. So from matana, which I told you means a gift, right? It's from the Hebrew word notain. So there's a place called matana, but it really means a gift. You go to Nahaliel, which means the inheritance of God. Nahaliel. So from a gift to the inheritance of God, and the third place before you get to Pisgah, Dad, is a place called Bamot, which is the plural of bima. A bima is a high place, plural Bamot. So you're exactly right. This is a journey of elevation. And what the rabbis want to say is that to study Torah is to go from receiving the gift, the matana is Torah, to the inheritance of God, right? That's what Torah really is. Like when you study Torah, you are honoring the inheritance of God, and that takes you to Bamot, the high places, the bima of life. And from there, you could extend this all the way to Pisgah, a word that actually means the summit. It says the peak of Pisgah, but literally Pisgah is itself a word that means the summit. So it is a journey. What he wants to suggest is the journey the Israelites took in the wilderness is a metaphor for the journey every Jewish person takes when he or she commits to a life of Torah. A journey from the gift to the inheritance of God to the high places. That's what the rabbis are doing here. And again, this is like, some of this is, some people are going to tune out and go, oh, give me a break. This is really like very ornamented and silly. And I happen to love it, but I'm a word games guy. Like I spend a lot of my time just, doodling around with words and making meaning out of out of words. And that's what the rabbis are trying to do. And they come up with these elaborate and I think very fun ways of doing it. Okay. From there, from Pisgah, from the summit, we have to go back to Avot. So we're now in chapter 6, Mishnah number 3. And I imagine this will take the rest of our morning. So good. Okay. Let's read it in English first, and then there will be Hebrew to look at. One who learns from, sorry for the masculine framing. I'm not going to turn myself into knots to gender neutralize this, but I think a lot of this works in a gender neutral way as well. One who learns from his fellow, one chapter, or one halacha, one law, or one verse, or one word, or even one letter, bracket, of Torah, not of Moby Dick, like it's not just any verse, obviously they mean of Jewish text, is obligated to treat that person with honor. All right, that's the teach right up front. If you even learn a letter of Torah from somebody, you are obligated to treat that person with honor. Therefore, Mishnah Mavens, each of you is now obligated to treat every other person in this class with honor. If you didn't, the good news is you were already doing that. The way in which you are so responsive, not only to me in my official teaching role, but to each other. And many of you have commented over the long duration of our study how much you derive meaning from being part of a community of study. That signals that you already live, you exemplify the teaching here. But let's read on. Proof text. For so we find with David, king of Israel, who learned from Achitophel, we'll find out more about this guy, no more than 2 things, and yet called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend. As it is said, but it was you, a man mine equal, my guide and my beloved friend. We'll talk about all of these people. Is this not an instance of the argument from the less to the greater, or what we call kal v'chomer? We're going to talk about that as well. If David, king of Israel, who learned from Achitophel no more than 2 things, and nevertheless called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend, then in the case of one who learns from his fellow 1 chapter, or 1 halacha, or 1 verse, or 1 word, or even 1 letter, all the more so he is under obligation to treat him with honor. And honor, this is now an addendum, an appendix to the teaching, means nothing but Torah. As it is said, it is honor that sages inherit, and the perfect shall inherit good. And good also means nothing but Torah, as it is said, for I give you good instruction, do not forsake my Torah. Okay, so easy to get lost in the weeds here. Don't panic. As is our way, we will read slowly and closely and make sense of the things that don't make sense. We are still in the broad theme of Pirkei Avot writ large, which is, what is the good life? It is a life of Torah. And there are literally dozens of ways in which Pirkei Avot teaches this. But if you haven't picked up that, if somebody asks you, well, what's Pirkei Avot really all about? I think it would be fair to say Pirkei Avot is the master statement by the rabbis, by the ancient rabbis of the Mishnah, on the value of pursuing Torah. Or it is the rabbi's way of saying that a life well lived is a life of the pursuit of Torah. Something like that. That's the elevator pitch around Pirkei Avot. And here yet again, we see exactly that premise brought to life. And brought to life in a really clever, creative way that uses, what we're doing today is very much, I realize in the midst of doing it, a kind of masterclass in rabbinic hermeneutics. A word on that word. Hermeneutics is one of those geeked out words that I love. Hermeneutics is simply the mechanics of making meaning, specifically out of text or out of literature. It comes from the Greek god name Hermes. Hermes, you may recall, in Roman lore is Mercury, I believe. And Hermes also, isn't it another name for Apollo? The messenger god, the one with wings on his feet, on his shoes, who would shuttle between Mount Olympus and the earthly realm at very, very fast, and would bring the word of the gods to the people. So hermeneutics are those instruments of making meaning out of text that unlock it for the people, right? If text, particularly Torah text, is divine revelation, what is implied by that is that the text is itself not necessarily immediately apparent in its meaning by an ordinary reader. So the rabbis deploy what scholars call hermeneutics, mechanisms for making meaning, so that the text makes sense, parenthesis, the way they want it to make sense to you. What the rabbis would like you to believe is pure exegesis. In other words, we are extracting meaning out of a text, is, I would argue, almost always the opposite of that, which is eisegesis, E-S-I-E-G-E-S-I-S, which means putting something into the text, putting the meaning into the text, and then fooling you into thinking that they're just interpreting it. All of this, though, is what scholars call hermeneutics. And there are very specific hermeneutics used by the rabbis that constitute a rule set for the legitimate ways you can make meaning out of a text. I'll give you a very clear example. In rabbinic hermeneutics, adjacency implies causality. I'll say it again. Adjacency, meaning the condition of two texts being next to each other. The rabbis' hermeneutic around that is that adjacency implies causality. This is a principle known in Aramaic as simuchin. Samech mem kaf is the root, samach, which literally means touching. Rabbit hole that I'm down right now. When a rabbi is ordained by another rabbi, Rabbi A puts hands on the head of Rabbi B or shoulders. When I bless a child, hands are on the child itself. Thank you. Apollo and Hermes are not the same. Apollo was the god of light. Hermes was the messenger god. Thank you. I knew it didn't sound right to me, but it's been 30 years since I've read Greek mythology. Thank you. Very much appreciated. So Hermes, not Apollo. And I knew they were from the same Greek pantheon, so they couldn't be the same guy, even though the gods dress up as each other all the time. Okay, so when you bless, you touch. When you ordain, you touch. And the word for ordination is, does anyone know? Yeah, Dad.
Smicha.
Smicha, right? That's my, I can't turn my computer today because my microphone's in the way, but my smicha certificate on the wall over there, right? Smicha, ordination, touching. Simuchin means two texts are touching each other. The rabbis say that there's a principle that allows them to interpret the fact that two texts are touching each other means that A causes B, even if they're completely unrelated. I'll give you one of the classic examples. Chapter 17 of the book of Genesis, which we are conveniently reading this week, Parshat Lech Lecha, ends with the covenant of circumcision. So it tells us that Abraham circumcises himself and the males in his household. And then that's the end of a section. That's the end of Parshat Lech Lecha. Next week, starting on a Saturday night, we'll start reading Parshat Vayera. What is the very first thing that happens in Vayera? It says, God appeared to Abraham at the terebinths of Mamre, the oak groves of Mamre, at the hottest time of the day. Okay. The normal way of reading that would suggest new chapter, new subject, time has elapsed. The rabbis say no, simuchin. The two passages are right next to each other. So what's happening? Why is God visiting Abraham? Davka, we say necessarily right after circumcising his household. It was the first example of Bikur Cholim. It was the first example of visiting the sick. God was paying a visit to a convalescing Abraham and his household. They were recovering from the Moyle visit, and God went to pay them a nice visit to give them comfort. So the rabbis derive from Simuchin a really important Jewish principle of visiting the sick. So if you want to know where does this idea of visiting the sick as a mitzvah come from, it actually is never stated in the Torah, thou shalt visit the sick. It's rabbinic, and it's based on the adjacency of two passages that just happen to be this week's there. I just gave you a perfect Devar Torah for this Shabbos. A Lech Lecha Devar Torah. Go visit the sick. Why? Because when Abraham and his household were convalescing from their circumcision, a little surgery at home, God went and visited them. That's Simuchim. It is one of 13 hermeneutical principles, one of which we're going to examine in quite some depth in a few minutes. Comments, questions on that so far? Okay. So back to the text. So we're talking about the idea that even if you learn a single letter of Torah from your fellow, you must treat that person with honor. The example that they give is that David, and it's not unimportant to mention his rank. He is the king of Israel. That's actually instrumental to the way the rabbis read meaning into this. So David is the king. Other than God, there is no one higher than David. And it says he learned from a fellow named Achitophel only two things. He learned, in other words, not a lot. So there's a fellow in David's life named Achitophel, and David learned only two things from him, and nevertheless was obliged to treat him with reverence. Now, who is Achitophel? In other words, you won't get, we're going to be at an impasse with this text unless you know something about the relationship between David and Achitophel. Okay, so whether or not you're answering this question, Joe, you can speak up. No, you didn't want to? You raised a hand for a second. You're still muted, by the way.
It was something from before. I was just wondering about the word simuchim. Has it any connection with the word simile, which is close?
It isn't. It isn't, but that's a nice connection. It is also not related to the Hebrew word sameach, which deviates by two letters, even though it sounds similar. So nope, no connection.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so who is Achitophel? Well, he is, at least until late in the David story, one of David's trusted advisors, right? I've often said that the David saga is like the Sopranos or the Godfather of the Hebrew Bible. If the David saga is the Godfather of the Hebrew Bible, and King David is Michael Corleone, then Achitophel is Tommy Hagen, right? The Robert Duvall character. Conciliary. All right. So he's David's conciliary, but importantly, he turns on him. He's a traitor. When David's son Absalom, makes a bid to usurp the throne from his father and takes up arms against David, Achitophel, David's once trusted advisor, sides with him. So what ends up happening is that Achitophel actually advises Absalom to immediately wage war on his father David. And when Absalom does not heed that advice, Achitophel commits suicide. So it's again, it is the Godfather of the Sopranos. It is so full of, it is such a blood-soaked, intrigue-laden section of the Bible. You must read it. I say this all the time, and then I worry that nobody ever does. Go and read the Book of David. It's a great beach read. The book, there is no Book of David, but you can read the books of Samuel and Kings. You can read it in 3 afternoons and 7 afternoons. So read a little bit every day. It's great. So Achitophel ends up advising the son who would usurp the throne from David. Absalom does not take his advice. Achitophel commits suicide. So he is a much maligned, not much maligned. He is an ignoble figure in the biblical literature. He's not a good guy. And yet, the text wants us to understand that even Achitophel, the advisor turned traitor, David venerates him by calling him master, guide, and beloved friend. So the passage that is given here is Psalm 55, verse 14. But it was you, a man mine equal, my guide, and my beloved friend. And the rabbis read that as David's lament over Achitophel. Again, doing what I said you kind of have to do. If you want to understand proof texting, you have to go back to the original. So we're going to look at Psalm 55 just to see how this works. Psalm 55, Lamanatseach biniginot maskil David, for the leader with instrumental music, a maskil of David. So that's just the title. In other words, a maskil is a kind of poem or paean or lament, a certain form of biblical poetry that gets collected in the 150 of the Bible's Psalms. And like many of, though not all, but many of the Psalms, it is attributed to King David. And David, I'm sure you know, is a poet. He's the sweet singer of Israel, right? So when he's not kinging or fighting wars, he's getting in touch with his poetic side. All right. Give ear, O God, to my prayer. Here's the actual psalm. Do not ignore my plea. Pay heed to me and answer me. I am tossed about, complaining and moaning at the clamor of the enemy. Now, David had no shortage of enemies. It is purely a subjective evaluation that the enemy in question here is Achitophel, the advisor turned traitor. But the rabbis like to read these texts in dialogue with each other. So what kind of enemy must he be talking about? Well, the rabbis say this is Achitophel. At the clamor of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they bring up evil upon me and furiously harass me. This is very typical language for the Psalms. Woe is me, my enemies really suck. There you go. I told you how to summarize Pirkei Avot in one line. To live a life that is good, study Torah. Psalms in one line, my enemies are really irritating. Okay. My heart is convulsed within me. Terrors of death assail me. Fear and trembling invade me. I am clothed with horror. I'm really bugged about these guys. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and find rest. Surely I would flee far off. I would lodge in the wilderness. Selah. Selah is sort of, we don't know. The best theory I've read is that it was a musical cue. Like, hey, Levites, strike up the band here. It doesn't have any intrinsic meaning. It's not a word. Okay, that adds to the psalm itself. I would soon find me a refuge from the sweeping wind, from the tempest. O Lord, confound their speech, confuse it. For I see lawlessness and strife in the city. Day and night they make their rounds on its walls. Evil and mischief are inside it. Malice is within it. Fraud and deceit never leave it square. Yeah, David was a paranoid king, by the way. So if we want to read this through the mirror of David's biography, as it were, this is a nice way of kind of adding to the psychology of a besieged king. It is not an enemy who reviles me. I could bear that. It is not my foe who vaunts himself against me. I could hide from him, but it is you, my equal, my companion, my friend. You see how it makes sense now that when he says it is not an enemy who reviles me, that for the rabbis means, aha, this must be Achitophel, the trusted advisor who became a traitor, the one who betrayed him, not his enemy, at least not at first, but his friend, you, my equal, my companion, my friend. Sweet was our fellowship. We walked together in God's house. And then he curses him. Let him incite death against them. May they go down alive and this is we won't be reading this on Friday night at WRT, any Shabbat coming up. Like, this is just not the kind of liturgical poetry. But I guess if you're ever feeling really down about people treating you badly, go read Psalm 55 and remember that King David had it worse. So back to Pirkei Avot now. So Achitophel, the advisor who turned coat, who betrayed David, once his friend, his equal, his beloved companion, now his friend. And what the text is saying here is David, who learned from Achitophel only two things. Even he was able to give honor to this man. That's the first part of the text. And I do want to just see if there's a way for, because I wasn't able to find what are the two things that David learned from Achitophel. There are various legends. In other words, I did look this up. There are various legends found only in the rabbinic literature. In other words, I went back into the Bible. I could not find any example of Achitophel directly teaching David two things. You have to go into Gemara. So I had to look this up on Google. According to rabbinic legend, according to Midrash, Achitophel is responsible for teaching David two things. One, that the Levites should carry the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders and not on a cart. If you read the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 6, something really bad happens when they put the ark on a cart. The cart hits a rock, and the bed, the flat bed part of the cart, the horse-drawn cart that's holding the Ark of the Covenant, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that ark, the one with the tablets of the law inside, it does this. And the ark starts to slide out. And a guy named Uzzah goes to brace the ark with his hands to prevent it from falling on the ground. And unfortunately, Uzzah gets electrocuted when he does that. So Uzzah, not good, because Uzzah wasn't authorized to touch the ark. So there's this weird story in the book of Samuel about the ark. And so Achitophel, apparently, according to Midrash, told David, Shmucko, don't put the ark on a cart next time. You're supposed to hold it on, I don't know, what's this? When you have poles that go through it. You've seen images of the ark being carried. It's always this. You don't put it in the boot of your car. Okay. Secondly, the second thing is that you could write the name of God on a piece of clay in order to prevent the primal waters of creation from rising and flooding the universe. I don't know where the rabbis get this. It's in Tractate Sukkah of the Babylonian Talmud. The fact that it is really, really, really obscure halacha. So apparently David learns two important things from Achitophel, the guy who eventually betrayed him. One, don't put the holy ark on a cart. And two, if you write the name of God in a piece of clay, it becomes an amulet against the flood, the primal waters of creation, from flooding the universe. Okay, big deal. Except there's a bigger premise here. Then you have this line from Psalms where David says, "You are my equal, my beloved, my companion." The point the rabbis want to make is that if King David could honor such a person for teaching him such things, even though he betrayed him, how much the more so must we honor a person who teaches us even one letter of Torah? We're back to hermeneutics here. So the other hermeneutic, we learned Simuchim today. The other hermeneutic that I wanted to focus on is the hermeneutic known as Kal Vachomer. Kal Vachomer is probably the other really famous rabbinic hermeneutic. It literally means from the light to the heavy, or from the less to the greater. And it's a simple logic formula. If X is true in the case of something small or minor, how much the more so must X be true in the case of something big or greater, right? In this case, if you are supposed to venerate, if David can be seen, if the king of Israel can be seen venerating a man who betrayed him, but nevertheless taught him two obscure pieces of Jewish tradition, how much the more so is a common person obliged to venerate somebody who teaches that person even one letter of Torah? it's like a real mental twist, and I'm doing my best to articulate it. There are many other examples that are probably much, much plainer. And you can come up with any number of Kal Vachomer examples of your own, right? If it is not kosher to eat bacon, how much the more so is it not kosher to eat scallops wrapped in bacon? Okay. You take an example that is bad but moderate and make it extreme, and you just say, how much the more so does situation B apply, or X prime? I think you understand this. You don't have to be a genius to get it. I think you do have to be a genius to explain it. It's not so easy, and this is not an easy text. Finally, we get to the coda of the text, and then we'll open this up for some comment and discussion. Honor means nothing but Torah. It is said, it is honor that the sages inherit, and the perfect shall inherit good, also from Proverbs. You notice how much Proverbs are figuring today? It's interesting. And good means nothing but Torah, as it is said, ki lekach tov natati lahem torati al ta'azovu. Proverbs 4:2. I have, usually, you probably know this in the more, I think, the more elegant poetic rendering. Behold, I have given you a good doctrine, do not forsake it. My Torah, do not forsake it. That is the line that goes in the prayer book right before it is a tree of life to those who hold it fast and all the clean. It's the words you say when you put the Torah back in the ark. Behold, I have given you a good doctrine, do not forsake it. Why do we say that when we put the Torah in the ark? It's pretty obvious, right? We've just had our synagogue encounter with Torah. Now we're putting you away for another few days, or maybe we won't see you again until next Shabbos. Don't forget me, right? I'm behind this curtain right here. Forsake in the sense of don't neglect me. I'm still here. So, okay, we've gone really deep into some really thorny hermeneutical, that is to say, language mechanical stuff today. I'd like to zoom out the lens because I think we've had some really important teachings as well that, again, underscore the role of Torah in the life that is good. And so much so, by the way, that I think it's not a small thing to identify that the rabbis say the very word tov, or good, is a stand-in for Torah. What is good? Torah. What brings good into our lives? Torah. And everything else, it's not that it doesn't matter, but everything else matters less. Now your thoughts go here. And if it helps you, I'll bring the text on the screen. Yeah, beautiful. Somebody sent me a dictionary definition of forsake, meaning to quit or leave entirely, to abandon, desert, or renounce. Yeah, great. Right? Al ta'azovu. The word is do not abandon me. So yes, we're putting the Torah in the ark, but this is what Jewish people need to survive. This is our lifeblood. This is what is good for us. This is what elevates us. This is what takes us from the gift to the inheritance to the high places. Audrey Stoyer, you have a hand up. Oh, unmute yourself, please, and then go back to what you were saying.
Okay, I put this in the chat, but I'm wondering, do we know why that man whose name I can't pronounce
Achitophel.
became a traitor? What happened?
Okay, that's my homework.
Okay, sorry.
Not to deliberately indulge in hypocrisy, but I haven't actually read the David saga in a little while.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, but it's easily discovered. Why does Achitophel to betray David? In fact, let's see. I mean, look, oh, here we go. Why did they? Okay, so according to this, it was told to David, this is in 2 Samuel chapter 15. Achitophel is among the co-conspirators with Absalom. And David said, "O Lord, please turn the counsel of Achitophel into foolishness." In other words, convince him that this is a bad move. Absalom followed Achitophel's advice, so it doesn't actually say why would David's most trusted advisor leave him. He had been his right-hand man for years. So I'm going to need to go back and find out what was his motivation.
Okay. I also, in the passage about the pig with a gold ring in it being like a woman, pigs aren't kosher. Did
No.
that have anything to play in this? Do you think?
Probably if you wanted a metaphor that would really
Zing it.
zing it. Yeah. Like, I think the foulness, at least for the sense of like an image that really punches hard, you can't do much better than a pig with a gold ring in its nose. Okay, Mom and Dad, then Arlene.
I'm thinking about this again in the context of the manual for, how you become a rabbi. But in general terms, this all seems to be linked by the process of spiritual elevation, in the sense that what we do in the small things actually gets magnified and reflected in the way we do the big things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you learn a few words of Torah, this will lead to even greater teaching or learning. It's the kind of thing, how can I start? Well, all of the Torah is there, start anywhere, it's all good. And it seems to be kind of an admonishment for how do you get started with it? Start with the small things and they will magnify themselves into the big things in your life.
Lovely.
And as you know, I'm a particular fan of the Kal Vachomer argument. You may recall that I got into a snit with a good friend of mine who's an emeritus professor of English, who knows that I'm well-read pretty much, and who knows that I'm a doctor, and still commented that he was astounded and appalled that I hadn't read some classic books. And I took that to mean that if you think that I, who am a well-read doctor, don't know this stuff, what must you think of the literacy level of doctors in general?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Good use of your own Kal Vachomer there. Right. Yeah, once you know these hermeneutics, you'll really start seeing them pop up all the time. Because again, remember, a hermeneutic is just a way of, it's a mechanical device for making meaning out of a text, a teaching, a premise, a precept. So nice. Arlene, please.
Somehow or other, I vaguely remember from the book of David, or reading about David, I should say, that he became filled with his own power, and that there were a variety of people around him who wanted to take him down.
Yes.
And Absalom was one of those people, unfortunately, recognizing that he was going to lose his relationship with his father by so doing. But I don't know. It was a long time ago that I read it.
We really have to go back into the story and figure out what was, look, I mean, you could just say Achitophel made a choice and bet on the wrong horse.
Right.
Late in the David story, but it is 100% correct what you observed, that David, as he gets further and further into his monarchy, becomes increasingly paranoid, tyrannical, unhinged from reality, and he makes a lot of enemies along the way.
Yeah.
Power hungry. It really, David is a tragic figure, in that the promise that is seen in him and the way in which, from the time that he's a boy, felling Goliath with a stone thrown from his slingshot, to where he ends up a sad and pathetic man who can't stay warm no matter how many blankets they put on him, which is one of the images from the final chapter of David's life. And they bring in a concubine, they bring in a woman named Abishag, whose only job is to keep him warm, which is really amazing, because it suggests, I think, that he's impotent at the end, which is, his sexual impotence is also a metaphor for everything else that has become impotent about him.
Right.
And of course, David's virility is one of the things that got him into such, or his sexual appetite, I should say, not just his virility, is what gets him into so much trouble to begin with in the matter of Bathsheba. So David is this tragic figure. So he accumulates enemies and loses friends. And then, but it will be fun homework for us to figure out exactly why Achitophel sided with the wrong horse. Barbara?
I was thinking when you said the word Pisgah, what came to mind to me was how God took Moses on top of Mount Nebo, Pisgah, the highest point, and showed him the land that the children of Israel are about to occupy. So, like, Moses was venerated as the highest.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, of course, mountains are rarely just geographical features in biblical literature or any literature. They symbolize accomplishments, summits, challenges, like all of the imagery of, you know, not for nothing, the encounter with God in the Torah happens on the mountain. The purpose of the tabernacle is actually to get God to come down, like to get God to dwell among the people. So the geography and the terms of geography here, in light of what my dad said, also being metaphors for the elevation that is provided through spiritual formation, I think are noteworthy. Joe?
Again, it's easy to see where you get your wisdom. Your father's comments always.
I get it from my mom.
Always,
and
well, that could be true too. I'm sorry.
No apology necessary.
Marge, please forgive me. Your name is very appropriate, as we mentioned before. What I came up with was in the story of Achitophel. Even a bad person, or even a person we disagree with, or even a person we may think of as wrong, may have something, if not only one word, that may be true and we should listen to. I think that gives us a lesson that we should listen to everybody and take those good things and use it to our advantage. I think, and something that Doug said before also is that no matter where you start, you can always learn something.
Amen.
And even with one word, and something that you said reminded me of an expression I use with a class, and the last 25 years of my working, whatever you call it, working as a substitute, it's always very difficult to get to know and have the students know a person they've seen for the first time. And I say, sometimes I use the expression, the longest journey starts with the first step. And even though this is my first day with you, I will be your teacher for the rest of your life, and you will be my student.
I love that. And you know, your previous comment in this, not previous today, but previous just now, about the honor that Judaism insists ought to be given to another person who teaches you only a little Torah, even if that person is not your friend, or actually the opposite, lehefech, as we learned last week, that person is your enemy. Somebody with whom you vociferously disagree. I lament the paucity of such honor being given to the one with whom we disagree these days. I'm actually not just discouraged, I'm fairly despondent about what I perceive to be most people's inability to honor somebody who has taught them something, even something with which they disagree. It seems impossible. It just comes up all the time. You know, I mentioned this last week, we have somebody speak at the temple, and, you know, he said some things that some people in the audience disagreed with. I'm like, okay, great. I think back on my college experience, I think that I learned as much from the professors whose classes were provocative and who exposed me to things that really challenged my worldview than the ones whose teaching corroborated what I already believed. I'm not saying that, you know, this does not go to the extreme of an Achitophel, but still, Michelle, how about the last word of the day from you, please?
I'm not sure I like that because I imagine you'll add something. So that's
I'll
good.
add a closing comment.
So intellectually, I understand that these rabbis or the writers, compilers, while they engaged with the rest of the world and had civil, non-religious job, they had to make a living and they had to deal with these things. For them, everything that existed that had to be explained had to be within, shall we say, the four walls of Torah. And so everything had to be explained from that. And so that we see the need for the proof text. But I can't get past the fact that sometimes they just try so damn hard that it just loses meaning for me. Yeah, you can do this and you can build this and you can build this, but it just, like they're just trying too hard. The other thing I would just, and sort of related to that, I feel like this whole chapter 6 has a very different feel than the first 5 chapters, which were perhaps a little more comfortable with saying things. And they did not look nearly as deeply or as obscurely as this chapter 6 seems to be doing. And I'm a big fan of the Russian, nesting dolls, but I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, and again, I don't know enough about the composition of chapter 6, other than what most people agree is that it seems to be like an odds and ends, appendix to Pirkei Avot. To know much about the intentions of the authors, what governs, what gets thrown in, it still strikes me as a bit of a kitchen sink, except the unifying principle is let's have a final round of teachings on the place of Torah study, Torah study in the life of the rabbi and in the life of the Jew in the pew. With that, we'll end, and I hope that in some small way you have been spiritually elevated by our study today, and I hope that if you learned even one small thing, that it will be a source for you to, have a thought or a word that gives honor to somebody else. And I'm rather than fishing for compliments, I'm actually more interested that you find a way to pay it forward to your community of fellow learners. And please encourage other people that you know from WRT. If you find this a meaningful way of spending an hour and a half on a Thursday morning, please encourage them to come. I really am committed to the premise that if anyone joins for the very first time, they will not leave bewildered, but rather enlightened a little bit. So I will once again be traveling and not on the Bima this Friday night, but it should be a lovely Shabbat service and weekend. Please come to the temple to see the amazing installation of the artwork of Nathan Helu, sponsored by the Women of Reform Judaism. I don't know if Carol, if there's a specific time that's being discussed. Is that right? I could look it up.
It goes on all week.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yes, and did you enjoy your?
You have no idea how much it meant to me. The WRJ presented me with a framed illustration by the artist, which is very cool, that depicts an alleged, actually I'm not believed to be apocryphal, an encounter between the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Bob Dylan in 1992, which is really fun, and already has a place of honor on my office wall. You can't see it right now because it's around, it's opposite where that shofar is pointing, but I'm so touched and thrilled to have it here in my office. So on that note, I'll see you Wednesday next, and have a wonderful week and weekend. Bye-bye.
May God be with you in your travels.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Hola, John.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yashikoah.
Okay.